Welcome to the Creative Penn Podcast. I'm Joanna Penn, thriller author and creative entrepreneur, bringing you interviews, inspiration and information on writing, publishing options and marketing ideas for your book. You can find the episode show notes, your free author blueprint and lots more information at thecreativepenn.com, and that's Penn with a double N. And here's the show. Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn and this is episode number 444, all the fours, of the podcast, and it's Friday 8th of August 2019 as I record this. So in this episode, I'm talking about transitioning to a full-time creative career with Blaire Palmer and the challenges that may face you on the journey if you decide to follow this path. Now, of course, you don't need to be a full-time creative. It's definitely a challenge. But if you do want to go this way, and of course, I left my job in 2011, and in this show, I do talk about my first year in particular, which is a tough time. And I have said to those of you who I've talked to about this, you almost need to white knuckle that first 6 months at least before you can find your routine, your mindset, your money management, your productivity. All of it is a challenge if you're coming out of a day job. So I started writing properly for publication in 2006. I started building up this website in 2008 and then started the podcast 2009. And then I finally left my job in 2011. So I know what it's like to transition over a period of years. It basically took me 5 years. I do not like financial risk, so I made sure, we downsized, we cut our debt, we did all the things that meant that it was not. It was still difficult, but when I look back now, it wasn't very risky. So yeah, I think we'll talk about that in the show, but also some of the other things that might come up for you if you do want to change to a creative career. Now, of course, I think it's worth it. I love what I do. And in fact, everything I do now is about, not everything I do, but a lot of what I do is about thinking about the future so that I never have to go back to a day job. In fact, at this point, I'm probably unemployable. And in fact, Unemployable is a podcast I would like to recommend. If you are interested in becoming a full-time creative author, entrepreneur, anything where you want to keep having a small business, small in numbers, so just you, for example, or you and your partner, but you want to make good money. So they have this idea of 7-figure small on Unemployable, which I've been on a couple of times, so you can hear me on there, along with people like Tim Ferriss and Seth Godin. So I'm always quite pleased I was on that show. So that is all about building a sustainable business that you love, with no employees or very few contractors and still make great money. So that's Unemployable Podcast. In publishing and book marketing news, I am giddy today because Google has just announced that they are indexing podcasts. Now, this is huge for those of us in the voice space. And I have said that this would happen, and I guess I didn't expect it to happen so soon. But essentially, voice is very hard to index because you have to transcribe it in some way so it becomes searchable. Now, I have show notes, I have a transcript on the show, but Google has basically announced that they are going to include podcasts in search and have playable results in search. Now, it is just for English language in the USA right now, so I can't test this, but I'd love to know if you test it, like have a search for this show, like one of my episodes, and see what happens to see how that search has changed. But basically, it means two things. All of the voice content that has been created is going to be searchable now and going forward, which is great because so far, if you've had a podcast, you have not been able to be found very easily. But secondly, just think about the amount of voice they are reading into their systems to do this. Now, you probably, it's part of the terms and conditions when you sign up for various services. Now, Google has Google Podcast, which again, I can't get into because it's US only. But also Google Assistant is global. And all of this to me is part of the voice first movement, in that the more voices they're reading into the search engine, the more they're going to be able to index and to be able to learn. So this all feeds into voice AI as far as I'm concerned. So I am feeling pretty giddy about it because, of course, I've got 444 episodes of audio, plus I have 13 episodes at Books and Travel, starting again over there with that show. But clearly, I also think that being prescient about voice early on has definitely helped me with my author career, selling books. Many of you guys have bought books, but many of you also support the show on Patreon. So yeah, very, very, very exciting. So if you, well, obviously you listen to podcasts, you're listening to this. But if you haven't considered podcasting for book marketing, now whether that's starting your own podcast or going on other people's podcasts, that can often be the best way to get started, then I think maybe it's time to consider that. Podcasting is about to go boom. So the other thing this week is that yesterday, as I record this, the deal for Barnes & Noble went through with Elliott Management. Now, I mentioned this earlier on a couple of months ago, whenever it was when the deal came up, but that has now gone through. So Elliott Management is a hedge fund, and I find this just so fascinating. I do read a lot of the Financial Times. I read a lot of financial news. And to me, a hedge fund, well, to anyone, a hedge fund is not a company that runs a business for the long term. Their whole goal is to make a return, to recoup its investment, hopefully 100-fold, 1,000-fold, however many fold, but their whole purpose is making money from these investments. So it's not like, oh yeah, business as usual, Barnes & Noble will run as it is. We have someone who's going to look after it. That is not what's happening. So first of all, Elliott Management also owns Waterstones here in the UK. And the guy they've now put in charge, James Daunt, is well known in British publishing. He has overseen Waterstones in the UK. He owned he has Daunt Books, which was his own bookstore before that. And also he comes from the banking industry. So I think this is all quite interesting. Now, I can tell you, as someone who has, so when Elliott Management bought Waterstones here, must have been about 2 years ago now, I'll tell you a couple of things that happened so that if you are in the US and interested in Barnes & Noble, these are some of the things that may happen. Now, I'm not saying they will happen. I'm just saying this is what might happen. So first of all, if you go into a Waterstones in the UK, they're very well laid out. If you go onto a website and everything's really cluttered and you click away because it's too cluttered, well, that's how I feel in a Barnes & Noble in the US. Now, maybe that's not true in every Barnes & Noble, but generally my feeling in a Barnes & Noble is this is too cluttered. I don't know where to go, what to do, and it's not got enough white space, not got enough thinking room. Whereas I go into a Waterstones, and I go into a Waterstones probably 3 or 4 times a week. There's one down the road. I have my loyalty card. I go there quite a lot. I also buy from independent bookstores, but I do buy from Waterstones, and it's very inviting environment. It's open, it's spacious. And whenever I go in, there's usually some new books out on the various stands. So also, James Daunt, when he started with Waterstones, he returned a whole lot of stock. So what I see, the first one is I would expect that US publishing arms are going to get a ton of returns, because if you go into a Barnes & Noble and you think, what would happen if they took out 30% of books in here? Would that make it much better experience for the customer? Yes, it probably would. So I think there's going to be a lot of returns, and that is going to impact publishers and traditionally published authors. Secondly, he made things a local focus. So some of the Waterstones in the UK are even branded like a local bookstore. They're trying to get that feeling of locality. So what this might mean, I think, is if you're a local indie and you have relationships with your local Barnes & Noble, it may be that they even more are open to having your books, to stocking your books, because the focus is on local. So that's interesting. The other thing is that James Daunt focuses on physical sales. He has actually said, it's good to be a physical bookseller at this time. And even though Waterstones briefly had Kindles in their store, in 2016, they moved digital customers to Kobo. So what will happen to Nook? I really, really hope Kobo are in there right now having a chat. I just can't see them continuing with Nook. I think that will go to Kobo, maybe. Who else? I don't know who it might go to. Probably won't go to Amazon. And the other thing they did, which is really interesting, is they used to have these paper cards for loyalty in the stores, and then they transitioned to the electronic loyalty cards and a very, very good email marketing strategy. I have been very impressed with Waterstones emails in the last 6 months, I guess, since Elliot really changed things. And I click on them. They have lots of competitions. It's very engaging. It's very beautiful. They have a lot of signed editions. So yeah, email is going to be a big play. That I'm not sure how strong Barnes & Noble are in this right now, but I think that this will become a bigger thing over there too. And maybe this is a data play at the end of the day. So very interesting times for Barnes & Noble. I guess if you know, none of us can know anything, but I'm interested to know what you think. So as ever, tweet me at The Creative Penn or leave a comment on this, on the show notes on this episode, because this is an interesting time. And then finally, big publishers are changing the library lending rates for ebooks and audiobooks, making it more expensive for libraries to buy or license digital copies. So, and I'll link to the post in the Authors Guild about this. This is a very traditionally published focused discussion. Basically, traditional publishers do obviously license books to libraries, and often those are very expensive. And what they're basically saying is that it needs to be expensive because it cannibalizes sales. Now, I don't know, my opinion as an indie is completely different, and my opinion of digital is completely different. I have this abundance mentality around digital. I have books in libraries. You can go into your library and request my books, and they should be on the systems. And of course, if you publish wide, you can get your books into libraries. If you are exclusive to Amazon, your books will not be in libraries because, it's a closed ecosystem with a paywall. Now, I love having books in libraries. When I was growing up, I used to spend a lot of time in libraries. I don't so much these days. I tend to buy my own or license my own, but I absolutely like to support libraries. So that's why I have my books available there. Now, you can get to libraries through Drafter Digital, have a per checkout model for ebook library lending. Findaway Voices have the same for audio, which I really love, and I'm getting money from that now. So if you get one of my audiobooks through a library, I still get paid. So it's bonus for you and cheaper for the library. And you can also reach Overdrive through Kobo Writing Life, as their owner Rakuten owns both companies. I think you can also get in through Publish Drive as well. But essentially that per checkout model, I know Drafter Digital and Findaway do specifically. So I love that. I just think it's brilliant, because instead of the library having to pay $50 for a TradPod book, or $30, or I only put mine at $15, I think, if they want to buy it. But if they want it per checkout, it's a very small micropayment, and it means they can have it available in their library system, and they just pay a small amount per checkout. So I think the pay per checkout model is what libraries should be doing in order to make the most of the budgets that they have. So I don't know, I just feel like the whole library and digital and indie relationship has not really been there. It's not been very easy so far, but I think this may start to change things. If traditional publishers are saying, well, you can't have our books unless you pay more money, then this may be a time for indies to step in there and say, hey, you can get ours for a pay-per-checkout model. So yeah, go ask your local library, go and order a indie book paper checkout from your local library. If you're a librarian, maybe that is something that might interest you. In futurist stuff this week, I did an interview on the Alliance of Independent Authors podcast about AI and the indie author, or artificial intelligence and the indie author. So basically, I did the show a couple of months ago now on 9 ways that AI will disrupt publishing and authors. Well, this was Orna Ross asking me specific questions about some of the things that are most interesting. And of course, I talk about my experiments with AI translation, which is happening. It is in process. The first book is with beta readers, has been through an editor. So it's not just AI to beta readers. It has gone through an edit. But this is a really interesting development. So you can check that out, selfpublishingadvice.org/artificial-intelligence, or I'll link to it in the show notes, or just search on your podcast app if you search for Orna Ross, you'll get the AskALLi Podcast, AskALLi, and our episode is beginning of August 2019 on artificial intelligence and the indie author. Just a quick personal update. This week, I finished recording and editing the audiobook of Public Speaking for Authors, Creatives and Other Introverts, which is now a 2nd edition. So that will be out later on. I'm going to try and get everything out at the same time. So it's quite exciting. That is with the lovely Dan for mastering. I also posted on the blog how the thing I am in right now, my home audio booth, that is on the blog now. So you can see the pictures of where I am and what equipment and how much it costs. So again, links in the show notes, or just search the Creative Penn audio booth setup. So if you want to get into audiobooks or podcasting, then check it out. And I also link to a blog post about portable studios. So if you can't have a permanent setup like I have, although this is not permanent, it's just a wooden frame that I can take down if we move house. So it's not like a permanent setup. But anyway, so go check that out. I've also been basically scheduling things because I'm off to Podcast Movement in Florida. So I've never been to Orlando, so I'm very happily child-free. The thought of going to Orlando, Florida is not something I ever thought I would do. I've had a look at Orlando online and to see if there's anything I might want to visit apart from this conference. And there is a bone museum, so I might end up there. But everywhere else, I'm like, I might make it to the aquarium as well because I like aquariums. But yeah, it is school holidays. So I'm just like, oh my goodness. Yes, might be crazy in Orlando. I don't know why they're having it there. But anyway, that's where I'm going. And Podcast Movement looks to be fantastic. Now, it's very interesting how things are changing in podcasting. So I didn't even know until this week that people were charging for interviews. So I just wanted to, and I've started having pitches from people saying that they will pay to come on this show. And I've gone, no, you can't pay to come on this show. You can pay to be a sponsor. Absolutely, if you're a company that I work with. But basically, I don't do paid podcast interviews. So I want it, and you can't pay to write an article on my blog either. It has to be a guest post, and you have to be someone who fits with my audience. So, this is fascinating. The monetization of podcasting is just going crazy, a bit like blogging did a few years back. So I'm very interested to see how the business models for podcasts will work. I would, obviously, as I've said to you, if you're a patron of the show, I would much prefer I love Patreon. I think that's the way I want to go. And in fact, I'm going to a workshop with Patreon when I get there. So yeah, I'm very interested to see how this is going to go. These types of conferences on podcasting did not exist when I started podcasting in 2009, and the schedule looks great. So I will be bringing all that back. They also have a digital ticket, which I have also bought because there's so many sessions, I won't be able to get to all of them. If you want to know about this stuff, you can get a digital ticket, so a virtual ticket. So that might be interesting. Okay, so thanks for all your emails and tweets. Oh, I should say, sorry, that was podcastmovement.com, I think it is, or just search Podcast Movement virtual ticket. Okay, so yes, thanks for all your emails and tweets. Stephen P. Easler says, just finished a workout while listening to a podcast by Joanna Penn. I'm feeling healthy and inspired. Thank you, Stephen. Corey Shrum says, love the show on content marketing and the importance of knowing where you are in your business. Thank you for the reminder. And yeah, that is super important. Angeline Trevina said, listening to the podcast while crafting a dice for my 6-year-old, and sent a lovely picture of said dice, which looked lovely. Alexa Bigwolf says, oh my gosh, I laughed out loud at your "if you have a problem" statement in the July podcast. Now, yo, I'll solve it is stuck in my head. Sorry to everyone, I've just put that back in your head. And yeah, finally, Oh, I'm just sorry, I was scrolling down here. Christian Perfumo says, I don't know if you know this, but one of the most reputable creative writing schools in Barcelona has included one of your books in the bibliography of a course on the prolific writer, which is very exciting for me. And of course, that's in Spanish, and Spanish is going to be next on my list after German. So after this year, I will look at Spanish as my next language. So very excited about that. Okay, I always love to hear from you on Twitter or in the comments on the show notes. So tweet me at The Creative Penn with a double N, or put a link. Come and put a comment in the show notes. That would be fab. So today's show is sponsored by my own audiobooks. If you want to transition to being a full-time creative, check out How to Make a Living with Your Writing and Business for Authors, How to Be an Author Entrepreneur, available in audio and other formats. And also The Healthy Writer, you know you want to. Because if you sit at your desk all day, you are going to get lower back pain. I know, I've been there. I was at yoga this morning in order to, essentially, I go to yoga, 2 or 3 times a week to maintain my physical health, and it really helps with lower back pain. So yes, The Healthy Writer, lots of tips there, and also The Successful Author Mindset to get you through the tough times, and there will be some, I can guarantee you that, but yes, it's worth it. So learn on the go, take your author business to the next level. Just search Joanna Penn on your favourite audiobook app and get into some audiobooks. Right, so this type of corporate sponsorship or spend some money on my products, shout out, pays for the hosting, transcription and editing. But my time in creating the show is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. Thanks to everyone supporting the show on Patreon. Thanks to new patrons, Denise Gaskins, NC Manda, Alexa Bigwolf and Alice Phelan. I really appreciate your support on Patreon. It demonstrates you enjoy the show and want it to continue even after 10 years. And some days I do get tired. But as long as this is useful, I'm going to keep doing it. So I also put out the monthly Q&A audio this week, which is to patrons only. We looked at questions around editing, more details on AI, and a pretty personal, in-depth look at how I make money in my business, because someone asked me a question and I probably went off on a little rant. So all part of the patron-only experience, available to you at only $2 a month on the basic level, or obviously as much as you like if you'd like to support me some more. So go to patreon.com, patreon.com/The Creative Penn. Right, let's get on with the interview. Blaire Palmer is an author, coach, professional speaker and podcaster at abrilliantgamble.com. A former BBC journalist and radio producer, Blaire helps people escape the day job and work on what they truly love. And her books include The Hyper-Creative Personality and The Recipe for Success. So welcome, Blaire.
Hi.
It's great to have you on the show. So just start by telling us a bit more about you and how your own work experiences have led you to where you are now.
Sure. Well, I started life as a journalist. I'd always wanted to be a broadcaster, Well, I had wanted to be an actor before that, but then when I gave up on being an actor, I wanted to be a broadcaster. And so my first career was with the BBC. I was a producer on Radio 4 for the Today programme and for Women's Hour. And I kind of had the job of my dreams in my 20s, except the reality was that it wasn't like it was in my dreams. So I realized I didn't like it. I didn't like the stress. I didn't like the culture. And it turned out not to be for me. I didn't like being part of an institution. So when I was 30, I left the BBC to start my own coaching business. And we're talking 20 years ago now. This was 2000. I started training in 1999, left in 2000. So coaching was a really, really new thing at that time. No one had heard of it. I was one of the first accredited coaches in Europe. And I've spent the last 20 years developing that business. And as you say, writing books about it, speaking, and developing a real expertise around leadership, and particularly the future of leadership. What kind of leaders do we need in business today and in future? And how does that differ from the kind of leaders we've needed in the past?
Fantastic. So we're going to come back to your own business model in a bit. But one of the things I was interested is you help people, quit their job. That's one of the things you do. And many of my listeners do want to quit their jobs and make a living with their writing. But of course, you don't just hand your notice in day one and then get going day two. So let's start by talking about the transition, because sometimes it should be really slow. So what are your tips on transition while still working a day job?
Well, this is really interesting. So I said that my expertise is leadership, which it is, but I realized from coaching a lot of these leaders that many of them were very unhappy in corporate life and would have loved to leave and do something else. And so that's why I started a separate business helping people do that. And the transition out of corporate, particularly when you've been doing it for a long time, 2 decades, maybe 3 decades of working in corporate, the transition is not simple. You think that you know how business runs because you've been in the business world for 30 years, but actually running your own business outside of that corporate structure is totally different. And one of the things that I encourage everybody to do that I'm working with on that is to transition out. So whilst you might be tempted to storm into your boss's office and hand in your resignation letter and then find yourself a month down the line sitting in your home office going, okay, now what? It's not very sensible, not unless you've got a lot of money behind you, which most of us don't. So really the ideal scenario is to start developing your new venture before you leave. And there are lots of ways to do that, from the side hustle. Everyone's talking about the side hustle these days. So really setting up a business as a separate thing that you do in your free time, your weekends, and your evenings, or first thing in the morning before you go to work, and starting to generate income from it before you leave. So testing out your business model, testing out your market, testing that you like it. That's one way to do it. And in the end, that's definitely what you should do. But you don't need to start with that. You can volunteer. So this really makes sense to volunteer doing the thing that you eventually would like to do for a living. There's all sorts of ways that you can start to get your foot in the door and start creating that business and creating the audience that you're eventually going to sell to before you leave. And I think that is critical.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like some of those things, creating an audience is super important. But it was interesting for me when I first left my job, is that I immediately felt like I needed to put back a physical space routine and a commute, because the groove I had got into over 13 years in corporate was I commute to work. And so I ended up commuting to a library in order to work surrounded by other people. So what can people do about those routines that may actually serve them during that transition?
Yeah, I actually think the routines are really important. And yes, one of the things that running your own business gives you is flexibility, but most of us don't know what to do with it. So especially at the beginning. So I think if you're used to working a 9 to 5, then work a 9 to 5. Eventually, that routine will break down. I remember I must have been in the first few months of working for myself. I'd left the BBC and I had my own little office at home, and I had to post a letter. And so I was I never run anywhere, but I was sort of doing that half walk, half run thing up the street to go to the post office to get a stamp so that I could get back to my desk, because I'm meant to be working. And as I was trotting up the street, I thought to myself, hang on a minute, nobody cares if I'm at my desk or not. Nobody knows. I work for myself now. And so I forced myself to slow down. Just walk to the post office, post the letter, walk back, maybe have a cup of tea before I sit down, But it was so ingrained in my genes that any time away from your desk is, somebody is going to think that you're slacking. And I think that I'd only been in the workplace for 10 years at that point. I think if you've been in the workplace for 20 years or 30 years, then that's even more hardwired. So if you like a routine, stick to a routine. If you want to separate home and work, then go and work in a co-working space, or rent yourself a little office space, or work from a cafe or the library or wherever it is that feels like an appropriate place for you. There's no need to break all of your habits all at once.
Yeah, and I think you're right about the co-working space. That's why I ended up going to a library. So as an introvert, I don't need people. But what I realized is that I kind of needed to be in the world in some way. And I still work in a cafe with noise cancelling headphones when I write. So that need for community as well, I think, is something that's super important. So how apart from, say, a co-working space, are there other things that people should do around building a community in the new world?
Yeah, there are a few different communities that I think you need. And this is whether you're an introvert or extrovert. It doesn't matter. Everybody needs to belong to some sort of network or some sort of community. And there's a few reasons for that. So the first kind of community that I think you need is a sort of professional community. People who are doing something similar to you and are either at the same stage as you or a little bit further on or quite a lot further on, so that you can learn from their experiences. You don't have to invent the wheel. People want to share with you the mistakes they made and give you advice. And why on earth wouldn't you be part of that? So that's one very important network that makes you feel like you're not on your own. Another sort of community that's really important is a network of people that are interested in what you're doing because they might become customers or clients. They might end up buying it. And I think that we neglect, if you're not used to working for yourself, you neglect that community. And I think the earlier you can start to create that tribe around you, that gang of people who like what you do and are helped by what you do, the better. And then I think there's another community which is more general, but sort of very friendly. So this is your buddies. This is your family. This is the people who believe in you and have your back and tell you on those days when you wake up and think, I think I've made the biggest mistake of my life. They're the ones that tell you, no, you haven't. You've got this. You're gonna do it. How can I help you? And you need those people too. And maybe colleagues. Maybe people that you sit next to when you're working, or you see every morning as you're picking up your cup of tea at the coffee shop. Those kind of regular interactions are nice too. Personally, that's never been important to me, but I know that for some people, actually, they really miss having buddies that they see every day, somebody to sit with at lunch.
Yeah. And when I left, the co-working thing wasn't such a big thing. But it's interesting. I think also, I remember when I started to build my side hustle, I was going to a lot of networking things in order to meet other people in business, because I found that my friendship group at my day job, those people didn't even understand the idea of running their own business. So I guess what I'm saying is the people who love you and your existing friends might not be the people in your new friendship group.
It's true. And actually, sometimes they're the worst people to talk to as your friends and family, because they're worried for you. Their own fears come up, and they they want you to be safe, and they don't necessarily understand what you're doing, and it's very foreign to them. My dad, still after 20 years of me being in business, just really doesn't know why anybody would do anything other than work for the civil service. He just can't understand why you'd take that sort of risk. So yeah, I think, yeah, that's right. You need people around who are business people, who understand the roller coaster, who know what it's like when you don't have any business and it's terrifying. And also, you feel like you're part of something that's bigger than yourself. You're not on your own. Lots of people are doing this. They're having the same experiences. They're making it work. And that's really inspiring.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You mentioned fear there, and sometimes it can be terrifying. And I think that is something. And I often tell people, look, you have to white knuckle the first 6 months, because you're going to feel like running back to the day job. So what are some of the other mindset shifts needed to go from an employee to running your own business?
Yeah, I think this is really I think people think that it's all practical stuff you need to do when you leave. And that if you've got a business plan and a marketing plan and, all those sort of things in place, you've built your website and all of that, then you're ready. But actually, it's the inner journey that you then go on that is the toughest aspect of running a business, and the thing that will change you. You will be changed as a result of this. I think the first challenge, and don't forget, not everybody who leaves their corporate job does so because they've always had a burning desire to run their own business. Some of them, and a lot of people that I meet, they kind of feel like they'd rather have a job, but the job that they want to do doesn't exist, or they don't feel they fit in corporate life anymore, or they're fed up with the politics and all of that. So they're slightly reluctant entrepreneurs. They're not necessarily natural business people. But of all the options available, this is the best option. And so particularly for them, these things are true. Firstly, putting yourself out there. Now, you may well have stood up in front of a bunch of very senior people in your organization, or you might have been in sales, or you might have had to be outside of your comfort zone. But even if you messed it up, you still got paid. Whereas when you're out on your own, your performance when you're addressing a potential client, or when you're giving a presentation, or whatever it might be, that's money. If you mess that up, you might not win the contract or the client or whatever it is. So there's this extra challenge, besides the fact it's very personal. People tell you it's business, it's not personal, but it is. So you're personally putting yourself out there. This is you, your business, your baby, your reputation. And I think a big surprise for a lot of people is how uncomfortable they are talking about themselves and talking about what they're doing and selling it to people. So that's one of the biggest shifts to make, is to get comfortable with that.
Yeah, and many authors obviously struggle with marketing. They think they shouldn't have to do marketing, and even if they have a traditional publisher, they're going to have to do some marketing. So you're right, that's a really big deal. The other thing I think is that when you're an employee, you don't really have the freedom, but as you say, you might not want the freedom, and there are pros and cons of that freedom. So what I guess are the pros and cons of having your own business versus being an employee?
Yeah. Well, the big advantage of being an employee is the security. Now, it's a little overrated in that not everyone who has a job is that secure, in fact. And as we know, you can be made redundant, or you can be moved into a job you don't particularly like. And, so it's not as secure as it used to be. But nonetheless, you're pretty much okay. And you can see stuff coming if there's danger on the horizon. Whereas when you run your own business, you're very much living by your wits. And there will be times, you mentioned the first 6 months. There have been times in my 20 years, way beyond the first 6 months, where my business was not healthy. I think that it seems to me like every 5 to 7 years, there's some sort of crisis in my business and I have to pivot and reinvent. So the downside is you're living by your wits, but the upside is you're living by your wits. So you get to change it. if you realize what you're doing is not working, you can just change it. You can pivot, you can create a new product, you can re-niche yourself, you can just madly start bashing the phones, you can write a new book, whatever it is, it's completely in your control. And that aspect of it I really like. Whereas you are you're very disempowered in an organization. It's one of the reasons that people leave is they feel disempowered.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking about this the other day. One of the other things is when you're an employee, sure, there's a hierarchy and you can move up the chain and earn more money over time. But essentially, you're paid an amount per month. And it doesn't matter how amazing you are or how much harder you might work than someone else. You still get paid the same amount of money. Whereas I feel like being out here on our own as such, there is no limit. And I was saying to my husband the other day, it would drive me nuts now to not be able to scale my income whenever I wanted. Like, I know I can do X and make X if I just want to make more money that month. So like, we just bought a house and I went hard on, getting money for the deposit. So whereas when you're an employee, you can't change your baseline, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think, again, there's pros and cons to that. One of the big mindset shifts you have to make when you leave corporate is you have to change your relationship with money. Because when you have a job, you get paid regularly. Yes, there is a cap. There'll be an amount of money that someone in your kind of job gets in your company. And no matter how well you do at it, there is a limit. And there's a limit in your organization. If you make it to CEO, there'll be a limit to how much money you can make. But when you're outside, of course, there is no limit. If you're clever and you've got something that works and you know how to generate money from it, there's really no limit to how much you can earn. But the relationship with it changes because it's less secure, because it's less predictable. And you can this is what I mean about my business going through cycles. I can do all the things I've always done that have always resulted in new business for me, and then they stop working. And that's because the market's changed, or because you've saturated the market potentially, or very often it's the market's changed. So one of the things that's happened recently is that niching has become, and niching within your niche has become absolutely vital for a business. When I started coaching, you'd just be a coach. You could be a life coach or an executive coach or a business coach. And because there were so few, you filled your practice. It was not hard. Whereas now you have to be a divorce coach for women, or you have to be a manifestation coach for 22-year-old digital nomads, or you really, really have to go niche. And if you don't spot something like that, a trend happening in the market, you can find yourself just out on a limb with no business, and you have to fix it really, really fast. But as we've said, it's in your power to fix it. You just have to be alert, and you have to believe in yourself enough to say, all right, this has happened. How do I fix it? What are my options? How do I turn this thing around?
Yeah, I think you're right. And the same has happened. Obviously, I've been in self-publishing, for example, for 10 years. And we've seen in the last 18 months, pretty much you now have to pay for advertising. Before then, you didn't necessarily have to do paid ads. But that's something that has dramatically changed in the last 18 months. And many people, and before that, it was Kindle Unlimited, which, decimated a lot of people's, income. And you're right. We always have to be learning. And that's actually one of the things I love about being an entrepreneur, is that you do have to be learning all the time. And if you're not, you are going to struggle. Versus when I was in a day job, I just did the same thing all the time. And it was super repetitive and boring. But I wonder, what are some of the other practical business things that people need to learn?
Well, I think that the marketing, and particularly the social media marketing, is really, really important now. It didn't exist when I left 20 years ago. I got I got an article published in the newspaper, and that filled my business for a while. It just doesn't work like that now. So really understanding social and understanding how to create community, Facebook groups, that kind of stuff, social media advertising, algorithms. I mean, that stuff is really important now. And there are a lot of people out there claiming to be able to help you. And not all of them can. So you have to be also quite savvy about who am I going to allow to teach this to me, or who am I going to employ to do this, because everyone claims they know the secret sauce. So I think that the marketing piece, particularly social marketing, is very important. Obviously, your finances, understanding how the finances in your business work is really important. I was doing a coaching session for someone this week, and I said, how much money do you need to live on? She didn't know. I said, how much money do you average turnover a year? She didn't know. I said, well, let's pick a number. What do you think your margin is? She didn't know. Well, that's why we're working together. But the point is that you really need to know your numbers, and you need to know how money works and how much work you need to do, or how much product you need to sell in order to live. And it's very different. Especially if you're selling your time, it's a bit different if you're writing books, I think, and in a good way. But if you're selling your time, a lot of people think, well, I can't charge £1,000 a day for my time. I mean, for one thing, I don't need £1,000 a day. I don't need £20,000 a month. Well, no, you don't. But you're not going to get £1,000 a day for 20 days a month. You're going to get £3,000 or £4,000 days a month. And out of that, you have to pay all of your business overhead plus your tax. So actually, 1,000 isn't even enough. You need to be charging £2,000 or £3,000 a day because it takes you 4 days to win 1 day of work. So sometimes people who haven't been in business before can look at the money side of things and think, God, that seems like a lot. If I sell a book for £10 and I sell 1,000 of them, that's £10,000. Who needs 10,000? Well, you do need £10,000 because they're not all yours. And you need to, there's all the cost of sale in that, as you said, the cost of the advertising and all of that, and the tax and blah, blah, blah. And then selling 1,000 books is quite hard. So it takes a lot of effort and time, and all that money has to pay yourself back for all that time. So understanding the money, really, really important. And then I would say prioritizing. It's not strictly a business skill, but there are a million ways that you could spend your time. And the most important way to spend your time is on activities that will bring you in money, or activities that you get paid for. And the easiest thing to do is all the other stuff. Anything else. Writing blogs and going for coffee with people and
networking,
new products and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, networking. Let's go to another. Doing courses. Oh, my goodness. Doing more courses. Actually, the number one thing when you wake up in the morning, your question should be, how do I make some money today? What do I need to do today that ultimately is either going to bring me money today or bring me money in the near future? And everything else is secondary to that. And that's all about, of course, you need to balance that with the long-term planning. Otherwise, you won't have a business in 6 months' time or 12 months. But really, the prioritizing is a critical skill, I think.
That's actually really funny, because on my wall next to me, I've got a number of, things to motivate myself. But one of them says, what can I create today that impacts my long-term wealth and legacy?
That's brilliant. That's right. Well, there's a no better question than that.
So it does have the non-money thing as well, but, create a body of work I'm proud of. But equally, I like being wealthy. I enjoy money. And I think those are things that I think artists and creatives struggle to say out loud. And as you said, I mean, I've spent a lot of time and metaphysical energy on my relationship with money, as probably many of us have to do to go through that journey to become a successful entrepreneur, is that journey with money, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I meet a lot of people who run their own business, and when we discuss, fees or whatever, they say, well, the thing is that I just do it because I love it. I love it. So I don't really need to be paid, what you charge, for instance, to do it. I don't charge what I charge because I hate it and I need to be compensated. I charge what I charge because that's its worth. You can love it and it can be of huge worth. If you don't think it's of huge worth, then don't charge so much for it. But it's nothing to do with loving it. And I think this is one of the other mindset shifts about leaving corporate is that, people actually call salary their compensation. Sorry, hang on a minute. It is their compensation for the sacrifice that they have made for their work, for their company. But what you charge a client or what you charge for your books or whatever it is that however you make money, you're not charging to compensate you. You're charging for its value, for its worth to somebody else. And you can charge more if it's worth more. It doesn't have to have been more work for you. It doesn't have to have been blood, sweat, and tears from you. Yeah, it doesn't have to have been any kind of sacrifice. You're charging what it's worth, and that's the end of the conversation, really.
And I think it is different for when you're selling your time as a coach versus books, for example, because of course you can't change the price of the book once it's out, but you're looking at volume sales, for example. So I'm really interested in your business model. Most full-time creatives don't make their money from one source, and I certainly don't. And I like the multiple stream of income approach. So how are your streams of income working at this point?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think relying on, I know some people that have one product and that's their thing and they put all their energy behind it. I think that's quite scary. So I think having a few different sources which feed you at different times of year and under different circumstances is helpful. So the speaking, keynote speaking, I'm a conference speaker. I speak about leadership. That is a big chunk of my income. And I'm really proud to say that. I never thought that I would be a paid speaker, even though it's something that I love to do. It seems like a hard thing to get into, but actually, if you're a really good speaker and you have something very interesting to say and you market yourself well through, in my case, speaker agents, although you don't have to use them, you can do it yourself. There's pros and cons, but it's slightly irrelevant. If you love to do that, then being able to make money as a speaker is a dream. So a proportion, 30-40% of my income comes from speaking. Then there's my corporate coaching and so that's one-to-one coaching and team coaching. That's the other big chunk of income. And again, I've built that reputation over 20 years. So that's pretty consistent now. Enough people know about me that the phone rings most of the time. Sometimes I have to be a bit more proactive to keep that network alive and grow it and that sort of thing. But it's pretty solid, that business. And then the third aspect is a brilliant gamble, which is the courses and resources that help people to transition out of corporate world and into running their own venture. And that's really, really new. So there is some income coming from it, but the cost of that business is greater than the income at the moment. And that kind of makes sense in a way that you think to yourself, what do I need? It's a bit like the poster on your wall. What do I need to invest in today that is going to cost me more than it makes in the short term? But the idea is that I create something really sustainable for the medium to long term. And for me, with my lifestyle and my age and just things that I want to do with my life, having a business that in 2-3 years' time is generating relatively passive income. I mean, there's as you said when you were on my show, there's no such thing as passive income, really. You've worked very hard for it and you continue to work for it. But something that doesn't require me being in the room delivering something live, that feels very important to me. And I think it's worth the investment up front.
Oh, yeah. And you have a number of books. What part do books play in your business, or have they played, or will they play?
Yeah, so I was writing books at a time when you didn't self-publish. I mean, nobody did unless no one would buy their book, unless a publisher wasn't interested. So I always had a publisher. I had an agent and still have an agent, actually, and I had publishers. And so I'd be paid in advance. Very nice. And then I'd be paid royalties, obviously. In fact, for me, the books were never about making money. And that might seem like a strange thing to say, particularly now, because, I mean, someone like you is really able to make money out of it. And with self-publishing and all the other kind of spin-off business around being a writer, it really is possible to make a really decent amount of money from writing now, and from blogging and all the other kinds of ways that you can earn money from writing. But for me, it wasn't about that. It was about credibility and standing out from the crowd. And so, although I could have self-published at that time, it did exist. It just wasn't very popular. I thought it's more important that I have a publisher, because that says to my corporate clients and to my corporate audiences, this person was published. Someone recognized her as an expert in this field. And I think there's lots of reasons to write a book. Writing a book is really hard. I mean, your listeners will know this. I'm sure you have talked about it a million times. That writing a book is hard for all kinds of reasons. So you need to have a pretty compelling reason to finish a book. And I don't mean the first draft. I mean all the stuff that comes after the first draft, all the rewrites, all the sifting through. I remember my first publisher sent back the manuscript and said, right, we've now typeset it and everything. We need you to write 2 extra paragraphs in this chapter and 3 more lines in this chapter, because it needs to go over onto the next page. And I was thinking, if I had anything else to say about this topic, I would have said it. I don't have anything else to say. And so I ended up sort of waffling for a paragraph to push the text over onto the next page so that a new chapter would start on the left-hand page. Just horrible. I mean, I don't have an attention to detail. That kind of thing just made my brain melt. So there's lots of things about writing books that are hard. And you have to have some kind of compelling reason. For me, the fact that in my intro, when I give a speech, the person introducing me has a little intro that I've written that they read aloud to the audience. And one of the things it says is 3 times published author Blaire Palmer. And there's basically nothing better than that for getting the audience ready to trust you and believe that you know what you're talking about.
And yeah, I think you're right that as a professional speaker, as you are, sometimes it is more about a business card than earning money just with the book itself. So that is definitely a business model for speakers. So that's fantastic. We're almost out of time. So tell us, what can people find at abrilliantgamble.com? What's your focus there, and also on your podcast?
Yeah. So abrilliantgamble.com is all about helping people to quit their job and do something they love for a living instead. It's for reluctant entrepreneurs and people that are just ready for a change. It's called a brilliant gamble for a reason. It is a bit of a gamble, but it's also a brilliant one. And the point of the programs that I'm running over there and the resources, there's tons of free stuff. There's the podcast, there's articles, and more articles coming all the time, is to make it less of a gamble, to make it so that even if you are slightly risk intolerant, and even if you've been in corporate life for a long time, so this is something very, very different for you, that you can leave that job and start your business with confidence, knowing that you did it in a really thorough way, and you feel like you have something that you can make a success of, and that some of these things that are going to be new to you, like networking, like social media, like some of the mindset shifts, you know what to expect. And that's the idea, really. So there's programs on there, courses on there, and more to come to really help with that transition and to support you in the early days of your new business.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time, Blaire. That was great.
Thank you so much. I've loved talking to you.
So I hope you enjoyed the interview with Blaire today. And if you want to become a full-time creative, what can you do to prepare for the transition? What do you need to put in place before you make the jump, especially if you are as risk-averse as I am? So next week, I'm talking to Kat Rose about the creative introvert, which outlines how you can build a business that suits your personality, including the difficult topic of pitching when you are an introvert, whether that's for a podcast interview or at literary or networking events. So happy writing, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You might also like the backlist episodes and show notes available at thecreativepenn.com/podcast. You can also get your free author blueprint at thecreativepenn.com/blueprint. If you'd like to connect, you can tweet me at The Creative Penn or find me on Facebook at The Creative Penn. See you next time.